When HYBE tells Jimin something that changes everything, Jungkook's reaction shakes the room and reveals truths no one expected. "You're no longer essential to this tour, Jimin." The words cut through the air like glass shattering on marble. They came from the head of HYBE's operations team, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the entire conference room fall silent. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder. The faint, sterile scent of the polished table mixed with the faint aroma of coffee someone hadn't touched since the meeting began. Jimin froze in his seat, his fingers still gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell in short, sharp breaths as he processed the sentence. It wasn't just about a schedule change, it was an erasure, a dismissal, a quiet humiliation cloaked in corporate politeness. Across the table, Jungkook's gaze snapped toward Jimin, his brows furrowing instantly. He knew Jimin's tells, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way he pressed his lips together to keep them from trembling. Jungkook had seen Jimin under pressure before, but never like this, not in a room full of executives, staff, and strangers who had no right to witness his vulnerability. Jungkook's fingers curled into fists under the table. The chair beneath him creaked as he leaned forward, his voice breaking the suffocating stillness. "What did you just say?" The words weren't loud, but they carried a sharpness that cut through the formality of the room. Heads turned, pens stopped moving. Even the flickering projector light seemed to pause mid-flicker. The HYBE representative adjusted his tie, avoiding Jungkook's eyes. "We're restructuring the performance lineup for efficiency," he said, the sentence polished, rehearsed, devoid of emotion. "Some roles will be redistributed." "Redistributed," Jungkook repeated, his voice colder now. "That's what you call stripping someone of their part in the show they built?" His words hung in the air, weighty, daring anyone to contradict him. Jimin finally spoke, his tone quiet but steady. "Jungkook, it's fine." "No." Jungkook cut in, turning to him. His eyes softened only for a moment when they met Jimin's, the protective fire in them undimmed. "It's not fine. Not when they're talking to you like you're replaceable." The room was split between discomfort and fascination. Some staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting toward the door as if escape were possible. Others watched intently, sensing something deeper beneath the surface. Jimin's mind swirled. He had been battling private doubts for months, wondering if his voice still carried the same magic, if the younger members overshadowed him, if his worth was slipping quietly away without anyone saying it out loud. Now, the unspoken was being handed to him, wrapped in sterile corporate language, in front of the one person he didn't want to see him falter. Jungkook's chair scraped harshly against the floor as he stood. The sound jolted everyone. His hands pressed flat on the table, knuckles pale. "You don't talk to him like that," he said, each word deliberate, almost trembling with restrained fury. The head of operations cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward the other executives. "This is a business decision. Emotions can't dictate." "That's where you're wrong," Jungkook interrupted, his voice low but charged. "This business exists because of emotions, because people feel something when they see us. When they see him, you take that away, and you have nothing worth selling." The silence that followed was different now, less awkward, more dangerous. It was the kind of silence that comes before a shift, when fault lines form just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest pressure to split them open. Jimin reached out, his hand brushing Jungkook's wrist under the table in a subtle plea for restraint. His touch was warm, grounding, but Jungkook didn't look away from the man across the table. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing like he was memorizing the face of someone he would never forget. When the meeting ended, no one moved immediately. Papers were shuffled without urgency, chairs pushed back slowly, as if everyone feared that any sudden motion might reignite the confrontation. Jimin walked out first, his back straight but his shoulders heavy. The hallway outside smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink, the world suddenly too quiet compared to the storm in his chest. Jungkook followed a step behind, his pace deliberate, his shadow never leaving Jimin's. When they reached the end of the hall, Jimin stopped and finally turned to face him. His eyes were unreadable, a mix of gratitude, frustration, and something more fragile that he couldn't name. "You didn't have to do that," Jimin murmured. "Yes, I did," Jungkook replied without hesitation. The air between them was thick with unspoken truths. The hum of the building's ventilation filled the silence until Jimin finally exhaled, a sound that was part sigh, part surrender. And though the confrontation had ended, both of them knew that something larger had just begun, something neither of them could yet see, but both could feel. The elevator doors yawned open to a corridor that hummed with fluorescent light and a stale whisper of old coffee and paper dust. Jimin walked fast, like the hallway was too narrow to hold what had just been said to him. Jungkook matched his stride, a heartbeat behind, jaw clenched, the echo of his outburst still tapping at his ribs like a snare. "Don't," Jimin said quietly, not slowing. "Not here." "I won't be quiet about this," Jungkook answered, breath tight. "I refuse to play nice when they try to erase you in a meeting like that." Jimin stopped at the end of the hallway and turned, and the brightness from the emergency exit light washed his face a cool white. "Today, I needed you not to explode. I needed air." Jungkook swallowed. "You looked like you couldn't breathe." Jimin's mouth twitched into something not quite a smile. "I couldn't." They slipped into a rehearsal room, empty except for a piano pushed against one wall and a scattered tangle of microphone cables. The scent here was warm. Old wood, sweat, the faint ghost of cologne and the felt of forgotten jackets. Jimin shut the door with a careful click, then leaned his forehead against it for a second. Eyes closed, as if collecting scattered pieces he didn't want anyone to see. "What exactly did they say?" Jungkook asked. Lower now, as if the room had its own gravity. Jimin turned back against the door, fingers flexing as if they might start dancing on their own. "They said I'm non-essential to the tour. They said my segments will be redistributed. They said we'll optimize." I heard all those words, but what I felt, he swallowed, the movement sharp in his throat. I felt like a line item they can delete. Jungkook took 2 steps closer, the floor giving a soft wooden groan. "You are not deletable." "Tell that to the people who own the stage," Jimin whispered. "Tell it to the ones who make the calls." "I just did," Jungkook snapped, then caught himself, gentled his voice. "We can fight this." Jimin's eyes flickered hope and fear in a split-second collision. "What if I don't want another fight? What if I'm tired of proving I should be here?" The piano bench scraped as Jungkook slid it out with a shoe and sat, elbows on his knees. He said nothing for a few beats, staring at the black and white keys like they were an instruction manual for something he couldn't fix. When he finally spoke, his voice had sand in it. "Do you know why I get angry? It's not because I think you can't fight. It's because I know you have been fighting silently for months, smiling on cue while you bleed between rehearsals." Jimin's breath hitched. "You don't know that." "I know you," Jungkook said, lifting his eyes. "I know the micro cracks in your makeup by the 3rd run-through. I know the way you stretch your left ankle twice as long when no one's looking. I know when your laugh misses half a note and your eyes don't follow. You think I don't see it because I didn't say anything. But I didn't say anything because every time I tried, you said, 'I'm fine.' And I wanted to respect your fine, even when it sounded like, 'I'm drowning.'" Jimin looked away, blinking hard. "There's a clause," he said finally, the words nearly swallowed, "in the contract. About performance metrics, streams, attendance, audience reaction times. There's a whole dashboard. They showed me last week. My numbers dipped after the surgery and the rehab. They've recovered, but not to target. They didn't threaten. They suggested, and I pretended. I didn't understand." Jungkook went still. "They showed you a dashboard of your worth." Jimin exhaled, a thin, tired laugh. "Welcome to the modern circus. How long have you been carrying this?" "Too long," Jimin said. "Long enough to make it heavy." Jungkook stood, closed the distance, and held Jimin's face in his hands, not quite touching at first, hovering like he needed permission to be the one to steady him. Jimin didn't move. Jungkook's palm slid in, warm, against cool skin. He could feel Jimin's jaw clench and then soften under his thumbs. "You're not a number," Jungkook said, quiet enough that the piano might have leaned in to listen. A knock rattled the door, a quick, nervous pattern. The door opened a crack before either of them spoke, and a manager slipped in, eyes already apologizing. "They want you both back upstairs," she said, biting her lip like the messenger who knows they carry a stone. "There's an additional discussion. PR wants to be present this time." "Of course they do," Jungkook muttered. Jimin straightened. 5 minutes, he told her. "We'll be there." The manager nodded, retreating, and the door sealed again with another soft click. Jungkook took a breath like he was lifting something heavy. "We go back in. We won't be alone this time. They'll try to polish it. So we need to be specific. If there's a clause, we need a counterweight. If they want optimization, we give them proof of concept that needs you at the center. Proof of concept? Jimin repeated, eyebrows rising. Let's give them a performance no dashboard can ignore, Jungkook said. Not a trend, chasing thing, something unmistakably yours. You can't manufacture a moment. I know, Jungkook said, intensity sparking. But we can make space for it to happen. We can demand it. We can say, "You're cutting deadweight? Fine. Cut the filler trend segments and let Jimin build a live dance vocal suite that bleeds into my solo, then returns to his motif so the set breathes with him. New arrangement, new lighting, cameras that linger on breath, imperfection visible, the thing they're afraid of. They're afraid of dead time," Jimin said, half amused. "They'll call it risky. They'll say attention spans. Attention is not the problem," Jungkook said. "Cowardice is." Jimin's mouth did that almost smile again. A tiny thaw in winter. "You'll get in trouble for saying that." "I'm already in trouble," Jungkook replied. "Might as well be honest." They went back upstairs, steps in sync. The conference room was colder now. Someone had turned the AC lower and the seats were filled with more faces. PR had arrived with glossy folders, and legal with their quiet pens. The head of operations kept his tie straight, like it might shield his neck. A senior creative director, a woman with sharp eyes softened by age, watched them with a patient curiosity that didn't feel hostile. "Thank you for rejoining," PR began, tone sugar-coated. "We want to ensure this conversation is collaborative." "Great," Jungkook said, sitting without being asked. "Let's collaborate on an apology." A murmur quickly suppressed. The head of operations cleared his throat. "We apologize if the earlier phrasing was upsetting." "Upsetting?" Jungkook echoed. "We passed upsetting 20 minutes ago and slid into disrespectful. So, apology accepted when it sounds like you mean it." The senior creative director lifted a hand, nails short, voice even. "I'll say it plainly," she said, eyes on Jimin. "We mishandled it. Your contribution is not non-essential. The conversation should have been about how to best position your strengths while maintaining the overall flow of the show. I'm sorry, Jimin." Jimin nodded, the apology landing where it needed to. "Thank you," he said, voice steady if thin around the edges. PR's smile brightened a watt. "And with that in mind, we'd love to discuss—" "We have a proposal," Jungkook cut in, eyes still on Jimin, like the words were a bridge he was laying beneath him. "New arrangement, cut fluff. Create a centerpiece which starts with Jimin. Not as nostalgia, not as a concession, but as the spine." The room reacted like he'd dropped a small bomb. PR sat back. Legal paused mid-note. Operations blinked. The creative director leaned forward. "Tell me." Jungkook's hands shaped the space in front of him. The rhythm of a performer becoming a designer. "Start with an unaccompanied movement. No beat for 8 counts. Just breath and footfall. Lights low, body mic hot, so the audience hears the skin, the fabric, the inhale. Bring in an off-tempo piano as a heartbeat, then a vocal, raw, not sweet. We loop that motif, let the band build around him, and at the crest I enter not to overshadow, but to mirror. A duet that doesn't ask permission to be imperfect. We end not with a pose, but with an exhale, and we leave 10 seconds of actual silence." He looked around the room. "If your dashboards can't read that, that's a limitation of the dashboard, not of him." Jimin stared at him like he'd just been handed back, something he thought he'd lost. PR tried to find a way to care about metrics in that shape. "It's ambitious." "Ambitious is what people pay for," Jungkook said. "If they wanted safe, they'd stream elevator music." Operations adjusted his tie again. "We have concerns about pacing and retention. The show has to hold." The creative director glanced at Jimin. "Can you carry those first minutes alone?" Jimin inhaled, shaky only in the first fraction. "Yes," he said. "If I'm treated like an artist, not a statistic." The creative director nodded, a flicker of respect passing through her gaze. "Then let's test it." Legal spoke for the first time. "We will need to review the contractual implications of rearrangement and recording rights." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "Recording rights?" The lawyer didn't flinch. "When a performance becomes a centerpiece, there are downstream uses. We need clarity on who owns the motif and the arrangement, given the collaboration proposed." Jimin owns his breath, Jungkook said. Breath isn't copyrightable, Legal replied dryly. Then put in writing that no one can use this arrangement without Jimin's explicit consent, Jungkook said. And mine. The creative director held up a hand. We can draft something reasonable. She looked at Jimin again. But I want to understand your head. The last few months, are you steady enough to make this your anchor? Jimin took a moment before answering. And in that moment the room thinned, the edges of everyone else blurring until only his own voice mattered to him. I had a nightmare 2 weeks ago, he said, voice measured. I was on stage moving and my body forgot me. My ankle wouldn't listen. My breath wouldn't come. I tried to smile and the audience looked away like I was a channel they didn't mean to click. I woke up with my heart pounding the rhythm of a song I haven't written yet. I've been afraid that I'd become the person in that dream. But fear can be a compass if you make it point you somewhere. I want to point it into this. Silence folded over them for a heartbeat. The creative director's face softened. Then we follow your compass, she said. Rehearsal tonight. Skeleton crew. No cameras. PR winced. We'd love to have BTS content. No, Jimin said, sharp enough to surprise everyone, including himself. No cameras. If this is for spectacle, it dies. If this is for breath, let it breathe. PR smile dimmed. Understood. They left the room with a rehearsal slot secured and a tangle of caveats trailing behind them like unruly ribbons. In the hallway, the manager from earlier caught up. Cheeks flushed. You two are... She broke off, shaking her head with a grin she tried and failed to suppress. Okay. 8 p.m. Studio C. I'll clear it. Thank you, Jimin said, genuine warmth sliding back into his tone. Jungkook checked his phone. Messages from friends as static. A missed call from a reporter he wouldn't answer. A text from a producer. You good? He pocketed it all. Food, he said to Jimin. You haven't eaten. Jimin wrinkled his nose. I can't. You can, Jungkook said, already pulling him toward the side stairwell to avoid a cluster of staff. And you will. 10 bites. I'll count. They slipped out into evening air. The city clung to the day's heat. The sky an indigo gauze. They found a street stand 2 blocks down, the savory smoke of grilling meat wrapping around them. Jungkook ordered without asking, because he knew what Jimin would pick, even when Jimin didn't know what he wanted. They stood at a little waist-high metal table, the kind that vibrated when trucks rolled by. 10 bites? Jimin asked, eyeing the food like it might try to run. 10, Jungkook said, mock stern, then softened. Or 5, and you pretend they were 10. Jimin snorted, the sound small and real. He ate. First bite, tentative. Second bite, because the first didn't cause the sky to fall. By the fourth, his shoulders had dropped an inch. By the fifth, the world had color again. The vendor recognized them and pretended he didn't, handing over extra pickles and a conspiratorial nod that said, I see you, but I will not make you perform for me. They walked back in a quieter bubble. At Studio C, the lights were low, the room big enough to hold a storm. The skeleton crew was already there. The creative director in sneakers, the rehearsal pianist rolling his shoulders, a lighting tech with a messy bun and too many keys on her belt, a sound engineer testing a mic by whispering poetry lines to himself. Ready? The creative director asked. Jimin nodded. He stepped to center, the floor under him a familiar animal. The sound engineer clipped a tiny mic near his throat, and they tested 1, 2, breath, and the mic caught the intimate rasp of air sliding in and out, the soft friction of fabric as he lifted an arm. Lights at 20, the director said, then dropped to 12 on his exhale. No music until his cue. Jungkook sat out of frame, palms pressed to his knees, watching. He had never seen Jimin like this, without noise wrapped around him. It was like watching a lighthouse switch itself on inside a fog no one else knew was there. Jimin closed his eyes and counted the rhythm of his own heart. The ankle he had lied about for months whispered a familiar protest. He answered by planting into the floor, sending a thread of intention through calf, thigh, spine, crown. Then he moved. Not a showy step at first. A shift, a weight change. The mic caught the soft brush of sole on wood, the hush of fabric slicing the air. 8 counts of nothing but body. On 9, the pianist entered. A heartbeat laid on purpose. A single note hanging like a drop of water refusing to fall. Jimin's voice found the space between breath and tone, a line so thin it felt like glass filament. He did not sing pretty. He sang true, and the room stilled the way rooms do when truth becomes a sound. Jungkook felt the back of his neck prickle. He rose on his cue and, like a reflection that refused to flatten itself into a mirror, he joined not to answer, but to echo in a different shape. Their movements spoke in a grammar they had never written down. The lights obeyed the exhale like a tide. The sound engineer's poetry whispering turned into a held breath. They hit the crest not with a shout, but with a widening. It was like the room discovered it had been too small and made itself bigger. When they ended, they didn't hit a pose. Jimin's last sound was an exhale, the mic catching the human in it, and then there was nothing for 10 seconds. Actual silence. No fan screams, no click of cameras, no chair legs. Just the sound of absence holding its own. The lighting tech blinked like she'd forgotten how. The pianist had tears he pretended were from dust. The creative director clapped once. The sound, a punctuation mark, in a sentence they had all understood without needing translation. Again, she said softly. But this time lean a fraction longer into the second breath before your turn. Let the audience get nervous. Let them worry you've lost the beat. Then catch it where they don't expect. Jimin nodded. He looked at Jungkook, and something in his gaze had changed. It wasn't relief, it was reclamation. He rolled his ankle carefully, felt the old ache, the familiar warning, and set a hand on his thigh to steady. Jungkook noticed the wince. Sit, Jungkook said quietly. 30 seconds. Then we go again. Jimin sat. Jungkook crouched, fingers pressing just above the ankle. Slow and sure. Still tender. It talks, Jimin admitted. Then we listen, Jungkook said. He looked up, their faces close, sweat shining like a new skin. I'm with you until it stops talking, and after. Jimin's laugh was soft and surprised. You're ridiculous. Correct, Jungkook said. Also, right. They ran it again. And again. Each time, the air bent differently around them. The crew learned when not to move. The lighting tech learned the rhythm of a chest. The sound engineer learned to make a microphone invisible. Between takes, the creative director moved closer, a teacher with hands that drew lines in the air. Here, she told Jimin, tapping the empty space between two notes. That's where your fear lives. Give it a bed. Don't ask it to go away. Ask it to sit. Jimin tried it, and the room changed temperature. Jungkook felt heat spread under his sternum, the kind that means something is aligning. It was past midnight when they stopped. The city outside had cooled to a velvet quiet. The last thing they ran was the silence 10 seconds practiced like a song. They discovered that silence has tempo too, and that it wears the faces of the people who hold it. After, they sat on the floor against the wall. The room, a tangle of cables and the hush of equipment resting. The creative director crouched in front of them, elbows on her knees. It works, she said simply. And it only works if it's you. Jimin nodded, tired and luminous. Then we do it live. You'll get pushback, she warned. Not everyone understands why people need to hear breath. They will, Jungkook said. Or they'll learn. The manager peeked in, hair frizzed by hours of running. Security says there are fans outside, she said with a small grimace. They heard you were in. Someone leaked. Jungkook shot Jimin a look. Do you want to go through the side? Jimin shook his head. No, front. The manager blinked. Are you sure? I'm sure, Jimin said. If tonight has a spine, it's honesty. Let's walk through it. They left the studio together, the building's lobby smelling like lemon cleaner and night. As they approached the doors, the low murmur of voices gathered nervous, excited, reverent. When the doors opened, the air lifted with the heat of bodies and the healthy shock of being seen. The crowd wasn't enormous, but it was enough. A constellation of faces holding phones low, eyes high. There were handmade signs. There were quiet sobs. There was a boy with trembling hands who didn't lift his camera because he couldn't stop crying long enough to aim it. Jimin stopped. The night pressed its cool palm to his forehead. He bowed. Not a performance bow, but a thank you with a bend deep enough to scrape the fear from the soles of his shoes. When he straightened, his voice found a simple sentence and offered it to the night. I'll see you soon, he said. Properly. The crowd didn't scream. They answered with a sound like relief. Jungkook stood at his side, shoulders squared, in a shape that said, I will stand here until you are finished. A girl handed Jimin a small folded note without trying to touch him, and he took it and tucked it into his jacket like a fragile thing you keep close until you can read it in private. They walked to the car. The city breathed. In the back seat, quiet at last, Jimin let his head fall back and closed his eyes. Jungkook watched the streetlights slide over his face in gold strips, then turned to the window, the city unspooling. "Do you ever think," Jimin said after a while, eyes still closed, voice low, "that we built something so big we forgot how to hold it?" "All the time," Jungkook said. "Then something reminds me, it's not ours to hold alone." "You mean them," Jimin murmured. "I mean you," Jungkook said. And Jimin's eyes opened, slow, a small asteroid of surprise crossing his features before he tucked it away where it could warm him later. He reached for Jungkook's hand and found it waiting, easy as breathing, and neither of them said anything more for the rest of the ride because silence, tonight, had already proven it could carry more than words. Morning hit like a camera flash. Jungkook woke to a phone vibrating itself across the nightstand. The screen, a grid of notifications crawling so fast it looked like rain. He blinked away the grid of too little sleep and answered the manager's call on the third buzz, voice still raspy. "Don't open Twitter," she said without preamble. "Actually, don't open anything." He sat up, the room tilting slightly as the alarm clock's red digits came into focus. "What happened?" "There's a clip," she said, and he could hear her walking fast, keys chiming against a lanyard. "From last night's rehearsal. Someone in the building recorded audio through the wall or the vent. We're still trying to figure it out. It's rough. Just a minute of breath. A piano note. And you saying cowardice is the problem from the earlier meeting. It's trending with a very generous range of interpretations." He swung his legs out of bed, the carpet cool under his feet. "Show me." "I just said, show me," he repeated, and the tone in his voice made the argument die on her end. A link came through. He clicked. The audio was tinny, a ghost of the real thing, but Jimin's breath was unmistakable. The intimate friction of it turning the internet into a room full of people leaning in. And then his own voice, colder than he remembered, carved its way through the clip. "Cowardice is the problem." The caption above it branded the sentence like a billboard. Interpretations layered beneath like a storm cloud breaking. Was he calling the company cowards? The industry? Them? Himself? The debate had teeth. The door opened from the hall with a soft beep, and Jimin came in without knocking, hoodie up, eyes alert, in a way that meant his anxiety had already had coffee. He shut the door behind him and leaned on it like he might hold the morning out by force. "You saw it," he said. "I heard it," Jungkook said. "You okay?" "I don't know." Jimin's hand slid down the door until his fingers caught the edge of his pocket. "I feel exposed, but not in the way I expected. They're hearing me breathe without being told how to feel. It's raw, it's wrong, it's true." Jungkook crossed the room and pulled him into a hug that had more bone than softness. "We'll fix what needs fixing and protect what doesn't." "What if it doesn't need fixing?" Jimin said into his shoulder, the words small and stubborn. "What if it needs defending?" They showered fast, dressed faster, and were in the car before 9. The city had scrubbed itself into a gray focus, the kind of weather that makes fluorescent lights look honest. At the HYBE building, security ushered them through back corridors, avoiding the tight knot of fans at the front doors who were holding handwritten signs that said "breathe" as if it were both instruction and blessing. The elevator clicked upward in measured numbers until it opened onto a floor with carpet soft enough to swallow sound. In the conference room, PR had multiplied overnight. A digital monitor displayed a dashboard with charts that looked like seismograph readings of an emotional earthquake. The head of operations had 2 coffees, both of which looked like apologies he wasn't ready to deliver. The creative director stood at the window with her hands in her pockets, eyes on the horizon like she'd decided to measure the distance to the truth. "Thank you for coming in," PR began, the words shaped like a sterile tray. Jungkook pulled out a chair, the legs dragging just enough to remind everyone they were dealing with gravity. "We didn't come in to be handled," he said, sitting. "We came to be clear." Jimin lowered his hood and took the seat beside him. His hair was still damp at the temples. He looked both fragile and unbreakable, like a glass that could cut you if you tried to pick it up wrong. "We're investigating the leak," Legal said. "We take unauthorized recordings seriously." "Good," Jungkook replied. "But that's not the point." PR clicked to a slide. This is the point right now, she said, a thin smile stretched over the data. Look at the engagement curve. The clip has generated a spike in sentiment, both positive and negative. There's a polarizing narrative emerging, that the company is suppressing artistry versus that the artists are insubordinate and unprofessional. Both are unfortunate. We need to deliver a narrative that recenters on the music and the tour. Jimin's eyes didn't leave the screen. You mean we need to deliver a narrative that makes you comfortable? We need to prevent brand erosion, PR corrected, as if he'd mispronounced something important. The creative director moved away from the window. What's the plan? She asked, tone neutral, gaze flicking between Jimin and Jungkook like she was remembering last night's 10 seconds of silence. Operations coughed. We propose a joint statement. We acknowledge the rehearsal. We emphasize the collaborative nature of the tour. We frame the leaked audio as an unfortunate breach of privacy, but also as a glimpse into the intense, creative process that our audiences rarely see. We then announce an exciting new center stage concept that celebrates Jimin's artistry and the group's innovation. Which would be true, the creative director added carefully, if we mean it. Jungkook leaned forward, forearms braced on the table. We'll agree to a statement if it says what we actually believe. You call it a glimpse into the creative process because you're scared to call it what it is. A man breathing himself back into a room you told him he might not belong in. Silence flickered. Legal shifted in his seat. PR opened her mouth, closed it, and adjusted to a smile with less sugar. Jimin spoke, voice steady. You want to know what would stabilize sentiment? You want to know what would cut through the noise? Let me do it live. Not in 3 weeks. Not buried in the middle of a set like a polite experiment. On the next show date. No safety net, no patched edges. Let me stand in the light and breathe, and you let the audience decide whether that was worth hearing. Operations pressed lips together, the muscle in his jaw pulsing like a metronome. It's a logistical risk. It's an artistic necessity, Jimin said, and there was iron in it now. The creative director sat, folding one leg over the other, the sole of her sneaker clean and blunt. If we greenlight this, we need to rebuild sections around it. Lighting, blocking, camera direction, live audio mix. We'll need rehearsal time and trust. She paused. And we'll need the courage to not polish the life out of it. Jungkook nodded. We can do all of that, but we need control. Jimin leads the section. I follow. You support. He looked at legal. And you put it in writing. PR exhaled through her nose like she was counting to 5. The language will be delicate. The language will be honest, Jungkook said. They worked the skeleton of a statement for an hour. Words were debated like they mattered because this time, they did. They stripped out the phrases that apologized without saying why, and they left in the sentences that made the floorboards creak. When they found the line they could all live with, it was a simple paragraph that called the leak what it was, called the rehearsal, a process the audience wasn't usually invited to witness, and called the forthcoming performance a moment built around breath, presence, and imperfection. Once the adults had their commas in order, the teenagers that still lived in the bodies of 2 globally recognizable men started talking like the world wasn't watching. In the hall, away from screens, Jimin leaned against the wall and let his head thud back softly. I hate the word insubordinate, he said. It makes me feel like a complaint letter in a file cabinet. Jungkook laughed, the sound short but clean. It makes you feel smaller because it was designed to. This is not that. Then what is this? Jimin asked, eyes searching his. It's you saying yes to yourself, Jungkook answered. I'm just the echo. The manager reappeared with a stitched-together schedule and a string of texts from logistics. You're both needed in Studio A at 11. Live mix is being rebuilt. Also, there's something else. She lowered her voice. The leak came from inside. Jimin's shoulders squared, the way a dancer squares before a jump. Who? We don't know yet. She winced. Investigations like this take time. It could be a contractor. It could be a staffer. It could be someone who thought they were capturing a memory and didn't think the internet would chew it into meat. Jungkook's jaw set. No more phones in the rehearsal corridors. Institute a check-in at the security desk with locked pouches. If they object, they don't need to be near this. That's aggressive, the manager said, half amused, half nervous. It's respectful, Jungkook said. To the work. Studio A was awake when they arrived. Lights warm, floor polished to a dull glow that held the marks of other mornings. The pianist from the night before was already there, fingers limbering across scales like water. The sound engineer had brought a different mic with a more honest capsule, and the lighting tech stood on a ladder adjusting angles with the economy of a person who knows the exact height of truth. They began again. The room's first inhale synced with Jimin's. He marked the steps with a sharpness that didn't deny tenderness. He sang without adornment and then with it, toggling between the two like a person trying on honesty and learning both fit, just differently. Jungkook entered on the edge of the second verse, his voice sitting a note below, a shadow for Jimin's light to draw against. Between runs, they argued, but the arguments were like flint striking steel, sparks that illuminated rather than burned down. Jimin insisted on a longer pause before the third entry. Jungkook wanted the audience to feel their own heartbeat trip, then catch it again. The director argued to keep the stage cleaner, fewer distractions for the cameras. The lighting tech argued that a single backlight at waist height could sculpt breath into visible shape. They tried it all. They kept what worked. They bent what didn't. No one genuflected to the last decision made. At lunch, seated on the floor against a wall with paper bowls balanced on their knees, Jungkook watched Jimin pick through rice like he was reading it. He reached over and stole a piece of chicken with a juvenile flourish, just to watch Jimin's mouth open in mock outrage before it curved into something quieter. The phone on the floor between them buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Jimin blinked at it. "What you're doing is dangerous." He typed back without thinking. "Art is always dangerous when it's alive. Who is this?" The reply came with a photo, a corner of the rehearsal room from the night before, a grainy angle like the eye of a vent. Then, "Don't trust the ones who say yes too quickly." He showed Jungkook. The food went flat in their mouths. "Who has his number?" Jungkook asked. "A lot of people," Jimin answered, frowning. "Too many, probably." "Change it," Jungkook said. "I will," Jimin said. But he didn't. He wrote instead, "Why are you telling me this?" No answer came. The message sat there like a pebble in a shoe, small but capable of blistering every step. At 2, they pivoted to camera rehearsals. The director of photography brought a handheld rig into the space and practiced following breath instead of beat, learning how to keep focus on a face in motion without making the lens a third performer. Jimin turned away from the camera once, twice, then confronted it head on, letting it see the moment his control trembled and then settled. The DP nodded, a student grateful for a challenging teacher. By 4, the people who made things happen that the audience never sees had woven a plan as fragile and strong as a spider web. The set piece was mapped, the silk of light was threaded, the arcs were drawn. And still, the room felt like open water because they knew that the ocean refuses choreography. They took a break. Jimin sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. In the dark behind them, he saw the nightmare from 2 weeks ago. Again, the stage, the failing ankle, the indifferent audience, except this time, the nightmare shifted. The ankle spoke and he answered. The audience didn't look away. They waited. In the waiting, he found space. In the space, he found breath. He opened his eyes, and the room had not moved. And yet everything felt one click closer to where it needed to be. Evening brought a meeting with wardrobe and an argument about weight. Jimin wanted no jacket, no extra fabric, nothing that rustled louder than his own voice. The stylist wanted at least a sleeveless layer to give the cameras a shape. Jungkook compromised with a thin knit that would cling and release with every inhale, the fabric making the breath visible without owning it. Jimin tried it on and nodded once. Fast. Decision settled like a drop of ink, finding its line. The statement went live at 7. The internet did what it always does. Split, swarm, analyze, meme, but somewhere beneath the noise, a current formed. People who had never seen a rehearsal room decided they wanted to watch a man breathe. People who had forgotten their own breath remembered it. A grandmother posted a video of herself counting to 10 with her eyes closed, whispering Jimin's name like a prayer and a dare. A critic with too many adjectives admitted he had no word that fit the shape of what he hoped he might see. And the comments from the cruel were still there, but they felt brittle next to the ones that softened the room. At 9, exhaustion brought honesty. Jungkook and Jimin sat on the edge of the stage with their feet hanging off like kids, the room otherwise empty of everyone but the ghosts of the day. They said nothing for a long time, and it didn't hurt. I was angry yesterday because I felt like they were writing you out of a story I didn't agree to. Jungkook said finally, voice a cracked glass warmed by tea. Today I realized I was angrier at myself. Somewhere along the line, I started protecting the version of you I met years ago, the indestructible one, because it's easier to fight for a myth than to stand beside a person who will change. Jimin's breath hitched and released. I'm changing, he said, not like an apology. I know, Jungkook said. And I love you through it, not around it. Jimin turned his head. The space between their faces held something at once simple and impossible. He smiled without showing teeth, a private language. Stay with me tomorrow, he said. The request so bare, it felt like the truest thing a person can say. On stage, Jungkook teased softly to keep the room from floating away. Everywhere, Jimin said, unflinching. Everywhere, Jungkook echoed, and neither of them looked away. They went home separately because the world has rules, and they chose sometimes to respect them. The night outside was velvet again, the city offering up its sirens and laughter, like proof that life refuses to wait for perfection to begin. Jimin's apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and the lemon candle he half liked. He showered for too long and stood in front of the bathroom mirror with a towel at his waist, watching the steam eddy like stage fog as it gave up its ghost. He traced the scar on his ankle with a fingertip and didn't flinch. He whispered to it, not sorry, not begging, simply naming it companion, not enemy. He changed his phone number at midnight and sent the new one to a ruthless shortlist. He slept on his back for the first time in weeks and woke once, parameters of a dream still soft, heart not racing, and fell back easily, the mattress catching him like a good understudy. Morning of the show came gold. The city was kind to them for a few hours. In the dressing room, the stylists worked with a reverence that felt like prayer. The makeup artist asked Jimin if he wanted the usual camera softening pass, and he said no. And she smiled with eyes that held him and powdered only the places that would shine so brightly they would blind. In the corridor, you could hear the pre-show vibration, the technicians chatting in shorthand, the thump of a bass drum rolling through concrete, the distant sea sound of an audience taking their seats and becoming a single body. Jungkook ran scales under his breath and bounced on the balls of his feet, his energy controlled by choice, not leash. He saw Jimin across the hallway, already in his simple knit, and felt the clarity of a decision. He would not outsing this. He would not outdance it. He would stand where he was asked to stand and give what the moment required, which was not noise but witness. Backstage, a junior staffer with a clipboard approached Jimin with a nervous look. They asked me to confirm the cue for the 10 seconds at the end, she said, pen hovering. Do we hold it if there's a technical malfunction? Like if there's a feedback buzz or a stray light, do we cut early? Jimin thought about it and then shook his head once. We hold. If there's noise, we teach silence to carry it. The girl nodded, wrote it down like a sacred rule, and ran. Minutes tightened. The lights in the corridor dimmed as if to warn the heart. The creative director squeezed Jimin's shoulder as she passed. The manager stood on tiptoe and whispered, "Another leak." And Jimin froze. But she was already adding, "It's okay, it's just your letter." He didn't understand until she said, "The note the fan gave you. It's circulating. You were caught on CCTV slipping it into your pocket and someone found a cropped still. The caption says, 'He keeps our words. People love it.'" Jimin exhaled. Jungkook smiled sideways. "Of course they do." The house lights dipped. The white noise of thousands of throats hushed to a tremor. The show opened with a familiar thrum, the body of the set alive and precise, the machine working, the prayer wrapped in spectacle. They moved through it with the grace of a team that knows how to hit marks without killing the reason they were there. And then, finally, the machine softened its grip and made space. Jimin stepped into the circle. The stage's center felt like a lake at midnight, still and dark and waiting. He could hear the quietest noises, the soft squeak of a shoe 2 meters away, the intake of breath in the fourth row, the minute electrical hum of a light being dimmed 1% more. He closed his eyes, not to shut them out, but to invite them in. He breathed. The first 8 counts felt like a cliff and a cradle. He let his weight shift on 3 as if he'd fallen and caught himself. He let a tremor run through an arm on 5 and then rode it into stillness. He pressed his heel into the floor and said, "I am here in a language no dashboard speaks." The mic caught it all, little and big, like a confession made into a friendly ear. On 9, the pianist met him without crowding, a note arriving like a visitor who knows to knock softly. Jimin's voice entered not as a weapon, but as a thread. and he wove it into the fabric of the room with the patience of someone who had thought through what it means to be seen. And then Jungkook came in, exactly where he had promised he would, not enlarging the space or making it smaller, but making it deeper. There was a moment in the third passage where Jimin felt the old ache ankle speaking, breath hitching, and the world slowed to accommodate it. He did not fight it. He did not apologize for it. He moved with it, like a river agreeing with a rock to make a new shape. The audience didn't hold their breath. They followed his. When he arrived at the crest, he let it open without shattering, a wide door instead of a shattered window. They ended with the exhale. 10 seconds hung over them like a canopy. In that space, a phone dropped in row 17, and no one laughed. A child on a parent's lap whispered something, and the parent kissed his hair. A woman who had been angry online found herself weeping without theatrics. A security guard forgot to scan the aisle and stared because he realized he could hear his own lungs working. The silence took them in and returned them whole. The roar, when it broke, wasn't a roar. It was a wave that lifted gently and then surged. But you could still hear the wordless center of it, the part that said thank you without vowels. Backstage after, people moved like they were 10% taller. The creative director hugged both of them and then stepped back, eyes sparkling like a person who'd just seen proof of something she'd suspected her whole career. PR was crying and pretending it was the air conditioning. Legal was already drafting language for the motif ownership and looked almost happy about it. Operations looked at his shoes, then at Jimin, and finally found the courage to meet Jungkook's gaze. "I was wrong," he said, and the sentence fit him badly but honestly. "I'm sorry." Jimin nodded, and it felt like a ribbon being cut without ceremony. "Thank you," he said. "Now protect this." "We will," Operations answered, and for once it sounded like a contract that mattered. In the dressing room, the noise dampened, leaving only the human sounds. Jimin sat and took off his shoes slowly, tending to his ankle with the care you give a friend who shows up consistently and demands nothing but acknowledgement. Jungkook knelt, fingers skilled with the wrap, handling the bandage with the intimacy of a person who had learned that service is a form of love. There was another text on the new phone from the unknown number, and Jimin felt his stomach tighten before he read it. He braced for poison and got something else. "They will try to package it now. Don't let them." He typed back, "Hands steady. We won't." Another reply arrived after a minute that stretched. "Then you won. Tonight, you taught a building to listen." He stared at the words and, for the first time since the leak, felt no anger left for whoever this was. Only a strange, nameless solidarity with a shadow who had chosen to be useful. He set the phone down. He looked at Jungkook. "Come here," he said softly, and Jungkook did, and they stood close enough that the mirror made one person where there were two. "I'm proud of you," Jungkook said. The words simple and heavy, unornamented, like a good chord. "Not for surviving this, for choosing it." Jimin inhaled, and the breath didn't feel like a task. "I'm proud of us," he said, "for leaving space and not filling it with noise." The night stretched on and the city wrapped them in its habitual neon, but inside that wrap was a pocket of quiet both of them had earned. The fans outside didn't chant. They murmured as if in a library built on a sidewalk. Someone started counting to 10, and the others joined, not as a trend, not as a trick, but as a way to say, "We hear you," in the language he'd taught them. The sound rose and fell like a tide you trust. Much later, after the debriefs and the hugs and the slow folding of costumes and cables, they stepped out into that air. The cameras kept their distance because a manager with unexpected steel in her spine asked them to. The security guards stood softer than usual, as if guarding a lullaby. The crowd parted to make them a corridor that felt like a blessing and a promise. Jimin stopped once, turned, and bowed. Jungkook bowed beside him. When they straightened, the applause that answered was the opposite of a roar. It was a hand on the back saying, "Go on, we're here. Whatever you do next, we will meet you with breath." They walked to the car without hurry. The door closed with the satisfying click of a chapter completed, not locked. Inside, the city lights moved across their faces like water, and they let themselves